And now we're up to Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis, and the Gemara is going to present Rava's formulation and interpretation of the words Ein Nedarim. Why did the Chachamim reject Rabbi Tzadok and refuse to be Poseach B'Chvod HaMakom? She'im Kain, says Rava in interpreting the Chachamim in Kain Ein Nedarim, Ein Nedarim Nishalom L'Chacham. Basically, you've undermined the entire agenda, the entire process of Sheilas Chacham. Why? Because if you're going to be Posech B'Chod HaMakom, then every Noder realizes that the Chacham is going to be Matir his Neder. Why? Because of Chod HaMakom. Anytime a person takes a Neder, we assume he did so out of anger, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not happy with that Neder. So that Poschim B'Chod HaMakom, if we accept it, is now a carte blanche to be Matir Nedarim in every scenario. And therefore, the Noder is going to come to a conclusion in his mind, why do I have to bother being matir the neder? I can do it for myself. I can always say to myself, well, kvod hamakom is enough of a reason to be matir the neder. And yet, the Torah says, ein adam matir nidrei atzma. A person is not allowed to be matir his own neder. He has to show up in front of a chacham or in front of a bezdin. And therefore, it would be suicidal from the perspective of Hataras Nedarim if we allow this Pesach of Kvod HaMakom. Once you allow that, you've opened up the floodgates, and in all cases, the Noder realizes he has no problem. He's going to come in front of the Chacham. The Chacham is going to ask him about, did you realize that you were being Mamayit for Kvod HaMakom? And then, boom, poof, the Neder is gone. So he might as well not even bother going to the Chacham, because every case, he knows the results up front. So you really jeopardize the entire enterprise of Hataras Chachamim. And the Torah says, Ein Adam Matir Neder Liatzmo, and he's going to be matir his own nedarim. So in summary, we have two approaches as to why the Chachamim rejected Rabbi Tzadok being Poseach B'Pesach Kvod HaMakom. Abai interprets it because we don't believe that he's sincere. He certainly is not going to be made his panam in front of the Chacham. He's inhibited for saying and declaring and admitting that he couldn't care less about Kvod HaMakom. He wants his neder, and he's going to lie. So we don't have a genuine charata. Rav, on the other hand, says that's not the problem. The problem is much more far-reaching. And the scope of the issue here is much broader because you basically undermine the entire enterprise of Hataras Chacham. A person will be matir his own neder and say, well, Kvod HaMakom. And now the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah and try to determine who's right between Abai and Rava in interpreting the Chachamim. Tnan, the Mishnah records a case in which even the Chacham concede to Rabbi Eliezer that there is a Pesach. Modim Chacham Rabbi Eliezer b'davar shebeino levein avivimo. If the substance of the neder was an isur prohibiting and joining his parents from getting hana from him, so again, right up front, he is mezalzel b'chod av v'imo by the very nature of his neder and its essence and substance. Is then the chacham agrisha poskim b'chod av v'imo. And why is that so? Well, let's take Abaye. We already explained this when we learned the Mishnah, that in a case where the substance of the neder is itself a chutzpah neged his parents, prohibiting them from getting hana from him, is bishlei Abaye v'yomer im kain ein nedarim nitarim hacha came in the ichtzafle. He's already demonstrated by the very substance and the act of taking the neder that he's a chutz binyah, and therefore he's already revealed or indicated that kvodom, that the covet of his parents is not something chomer b'einov, it's not something that he's concerned about, and therefore once he's already established himself as an ichtzafle, as a mischatzev, and a chutz binyak against his parents, and he's already indicated that the quote of his parents is not chomer b'einov, then it's obvious that he took the neder al das, knowing full well that he's been mamayit b'kvodom. That's obvious. Those are facts on the ground. He's not going to be embarrassed to say, well, yeah, you're asking me, oh, did you know, and would you have taken the neder if you would have known that you're being Mamayit B'Kvod Ovid? Obviously, he's going to say, I know very well I'm being Mamayit B'Kvod Ovid. I don't care about my parents. I don't want them to step into my house, cross the threshold of my house. I don't want them to get any benefit from the fact that I'm a physician or a lawyer or whatever I am. So he's not going to contradict the Chacham when the Chacham says, well, you wouldn't have taken the neder. No. And therefore, according to Chachamim, you're allowed to be posech b'chod of in this case, because if he says, you know what, I have charot, I really sincerely regret what I did. I didn't realize to what extent I was pogeh b'chod of the evil. In that case, we believe that he's sincere, and Abayi's interpretation of Chachamim fits in very well. And even though in poskim b'chod of the evil, but in this case, where the neder itself was a chutzpah against his parents, then the Chacham agreed that he's sincere and honest when he says to the Chacham, I wouldn't have taken this neder had I realized the full-fledged implications of my neder. El Rava, but according to Rava, the Omer of Kain Eini Darm Nishon L'Chacham is Chacham my poskim. We do not understand, according to Rava, why the Chachamim would agree that we could be poseach b'chvod aviv v'imo in a case where the neder itself was a pegia in aviv v'imo. Why? Because what was Rava's explanation for the logic of the Chachamim and their refusal to allow for this kind of a Pesach? Because it undermines the very, very fabric of the enterprise of Chachamim. And here also, even in a case where he is madir of the evil shelo yehenu mimenu, even in this case we have a chashash that if he sees that the Chachamim allow for such a Pesach, and they flippantly, or shall we say in a general kind of a way, they come and they say, well, you were forgetting the covenant of the evil, then he already realizes that, it's a win-win situation. He's guaranteed that the Chacham will be matir his neder, and therefore, why bother showing up in front of the Chacham? There's a carte blanche, automatic guarantee that the Chachamim will be matir mishum the Pesach of Kvod Aviv V'imo. For answers Amri, now we're going to defend Rava's explanation of the Chachamim and why they moded in the case where the essence and the substance of the neder was to asa the parents ba'noah. Came with the kol nidre lo sagi lahon delav chacham. In every other neder, which is not in its own essence and substance a neder against his parents, he knows that the chachamim against Rabbi Eliezer of Tzadok would not allow for a Pesach. They're not going to say to him, well, didn't you realize that you were against your quota of it? So there is no possibility of gaining Ataras Chacham through the mechanism, the vehicle of quota of V'imo. Is therefore here too, in a case where he took a neder, Beinola V'imo, since in general he's already used to other Nedarim in which the Chachamim would not be matur his neder based on quota of V'imo, he realizes that it's not an automatic given that he can achieve a heter chachamim based on kavod of the evil. Therefore, we're not afraid that this is going to undermine the entire enterprise of the Dom. He's not going to bother coming into Bezdin. He will come into Bezdin. He will show up in front of the Chacham. He realizes that in general, we've already set the precedent that the Chachamim will refuse to be poseach b'chvod of the evil. You're going to have to find another genuine person. The Mishnah now quotes another machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham. The Odom Rabbi Eliezer poskim in Nolan, and the Chacham Osrim, they say, no, we cannot be poseach b'nolan. My time with Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara asks the following. How is it possible that according to Rabbi Eliezer, you could be poseach b'nolan? The svara is really on the side of the Chachamim shelo liftach b'nolan. Because again, the whole idea of a Pesach is to establish that when he took the neder, at that moment, it was a neder tos. How can you say that about Noah? Rav Chisda says Rabbi Eliezer based it on a parish. The Omar Kra, Vayomar Hashem Moshe b'minyan lech shuv Mitzrayim ki mesu kol hanoshim avakshim es nafshem. What happened over here? When Moshe Rabbeinu runs away from Mitzrayim because of those two lousy bums who were malshin to Paro that he killed a Mitzri, he gets to Mitzrayim, wants to marry Benos Yisro, and Yisro makes a condition with him. He says, I want you to take a shmur that you will not return to Mitzrayim and leave us in Midian unless you get the okay from me. And Moshe Rabbeinu agrees to take that shmur. So Moshe Rabbeinu is committed under oath that he should not go back to Mitzrayim and leave Midian. And yet, Hashem says to Moshe in Midian, go back to Mitzrayim. Why? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu's obvious objection is going to be, but I took a shvuah to my father-in-law Yisro. And the answer is, Ki mesu kol hanoshim, meaning the people, we'll see who they are in just a minute, Dosav Aviron, who rose against you and they're looking for you so that you'll be killed. They're gone. They died. Again, we're going to take this literally that they died. The Gemara is going to reinterpret what it means basically, but right now we assume they died. And therefore Hashem says to Moshe, if you would have known at the time that you took that shvuah that these people who are mevakshim es nafshecha would die, would you have taken the shvuah? And the answer is, I wouldn't have taken the shvuah. I only took the shvuah because I didn't anticipate the possibility of my return to Mitzrayim, my safe return to Mitzrayim. If I would have known that I would have a safe passage and return to Mitzrayim, I wouldn't have taken this commitment and the shvuah. And Hashem is saying, you're now released from the shvuah. So the Gemara asks, Moshe Rabbeinu could not have possibly anticipated that these guys would die. They were young men. So this is really Noah. This is not something that existed at the time of the Neder. Mikan, says Rav Chisda, from here Rabbi Eliezer derives the conclusion, Sheposkim b'Nolah. For Rabbanan my Tamayu. Why the Rabbanan not agree that there's a valid derivation based on Kimesu Kol Anoshim that you are Posech b'Nolah? The answer is, Hanu bin Maisa. It's not true that the pasuk Mesu is to be interpreted literally that they actually died. Point number one is that when the Torah uses terms like nitzim v'nitzavim, for example, in Shmos Perek Beis, pasuk Yud Gimel, it says Shnei Ivrim Nitzim, and there in Shmos Perek Hey, pasuk Chaf, it says Vayifku es Moshe v'Aaron nitzavim. And again, we see the word nitzim and nitzavim. We have an equation between those two words, and we don't know who they are. Says Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rashbi, Einov ela dasan v'aviron. They must be referring to dasan v'aviron. Why? Because in the story of Korach, in Bamidbar Perek Chavav pasuk Tes, it says about dasan v'aviron asher heitzue al Moshe v'Aaron b'adas Korach. So the word nitzavim is referring to dasan v'aviron. So who are these people who are mevakshim es nafshecha? They're none other than Dasan v'Aviron, who instigated the whole machlokus of Korah against Moshe and Aaron. And those were the individuals who were mevakshim es nefesh shel Moshe. And the pasuk says, "Vayetze Moshe bayom hasheni v'hinei shnei anoshim ivrim nitzim vayomer l'rosha lo masake reyecha." Right, so Paro hears that that from these two guys, the Nitzim, that Moshe had killed a Mitzri, Vayivakish Laragus Moshe, Vayivach Moshe b'nei Paro, Vayeshev v'Eretz Midian. So now that we know that who are the Mavakshe Nafshecha, they are none other than Dasav Haviron. So what does it mean when Hashem says to Moshe, Ki Mesu Kol Anoshim Vakshe Nafshecha? Certainly Dasav Haviron didn't die because they're going to be alive at the time of the rebellion of Korah. They were swallowed up by the ground alive. However, Reish Lakish says Reish Lakish, if you've identified the Mavakshim Nafshech as none other than Dasav Havirim, who are certainly not dead, then what does it mean? Mesu Anoshim Mavakshim Nafshecha Sheyardu V'Nichseihem. They became poverty-stricken, and they're considered like Mesim, which is going to be the introduction to a long Agadita that Amir Hashem will start today, and that is that an ani is chashuv kimetz. Now the Mefarshim explain why this is called nolad. Moshe Rabbeinu did not anticipate that they would become poor people. They would lose their influence and their threat to Moshe Rabbeinu's life because they became aniyim. That was not something that was shchiach. Just 1 second. He says the following: Mevakshim es nafshecha is a reference, an allusion to Dasav Haviron. And now Paro, who wanted to kill Moshe Rabbeinu, you should not, Hashem says to Moshe, you should not be afraid because those Mevakshi Panecha have already died. Not only that, Paro himself died. The pasuk says, "Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim." So Dasav Havirin Hilshidu Olav LeParo Shaharges HaMitzri Misibazu Rotza Paro Larog Es Moshe Baruch Moshe LeMidjan. And Moshe Rabbeinu Lohaya Nishma. Why did he agree to the shvur that Yisro demanded of him? He was in a state of fright because of Dasav Havirin, and therefore he said, I'm not going to go back to Mitzrayim. Okay, now, a second. And he says the following. This is based on the Ran, the Rush, the Rashba, the Meiri. She'ein poskim v'nolad, hainu dafka, imu nolad she'eino shchiach. In other words, we don't anticipate that somebody who's Mavakish Nafshech is going to die prematurely. So in such a nolad, the Chachamim say, you can't really take the nolad back to the Shas Misa and create a Pesach and a Tos B'Shas Misa. Because why? This is Eino Shchiach. Aval, the Chachamim agree that B'nolad Matzui, Poschim, if it's something that you can anticipate already now, even though the Metzias is not changed yet, but you already anticipate that Metzias is going to change, that is a nolad, which even the Chachamim agree because it's shchiach, and you can be poseach b'nolad. The kevan also nolad shchiach b'yoser. Omdim b'dato, we evaluate his mindset. She'ilu hayamale b'libo nolad zeh hayanimna milida. But rather the noder, when he took the neder, lo hela davar zeh alivo, but he should have already thought about it because it was shriach, it was anticipated, and therefore it's considered like a neder tos. But the neder shalosh shriach, then omdu b'daito shafilim hayamale alivo also nolad lo hayanimna milida. So now the question is, when rich people become poor, is that something shchiach or not shchiach? So according to Chachamim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is posech b'nolad on behalf of Moshe Rabbeinu to be matir and shvua to Yisro, because people, we should anticipate that people might become poor and lose their influence. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer understood that this is really like Misa and it's not shchiach, and therefore there's no what you call it. If it's not shchiach, then therefore it's nolad, and the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is matir means that you could be matir b'nolad. And now we begin the Agadah to Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi kol adam she'en lo banim chashuv k'meis. If a person has no children, he's considered meis. Shenemar, it says at the beginning of the Torah, with regard to Rachel, Havali banim ayin meis anok. If I don't have children, and now I'll die without children, then I'm like a mesa. The Sanya we learned in the Bryce Avba chashuvim k'meis. The 4 categories of individuals are considered like meis. Ani, Mitzora, Suma, Mishaim, Lobanim. So we see clearly from this brisa that a person who's an Ani is considered like a mess. And from whence did the brisa derive this conclusion? Diksiv ki mesu kol anoshim. Because Dasan Vazira died. What does it mean they died? They were still alive. They were alive at the time of Korach, but they're considered as if they died because they became aniyah. And an ani is chashuv kimes. Now, once you've already established that ani is chashuv kimes, what about mitzora suma mishen lobon? Mitzora d'chsiv. Aaron says to Moshe Rabbeinu after Miriam has tzaras, al no tehi kimes. Please pray on behalf of your sister, our sister Miriam, so that she shouldn't be like a mess. So we see that a mitzora is considered like a mess. And Rashi in Chumash says, why is a mitzvah considered like a mess? Kishem shemes mitami b'biyah. It means that if a person is together with a dead body on the one roof, then the person becomes tamei. Kacha nimtza tachas gage echad im ha-mitzvah nitma. The Marsha says that the mitzvah is chashuv kemes because his life is not really a life that's worth living. He is completely quarantined from society. The Summa, how do you know that the Summa is considered like a mess? The Siv, it says in the 3rd chapter of Eicha v'machshakim hoshivani. Yirmiyahu Navi compares himself after the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash to someone who's sitting in the dark. He's in the Afela. He cannot see. And in the end of the pasuk, it says, "Kimakshaki Roshivani Kimesei Olam," that a suma who can't see the world is dead to the world. How do we know that if he's left this world without children, he's a mess? It's it said by Rachel, as we saw earlier, Havali Banim in Ayin Mesa Anoki. That was the Joshua of Yeshua ben Eli. Okay, then that's today's daf, and in Mitzvah tomorrow we begin with daf Samachay, and that'll be at about 9:45. Again, depending upon when everything is ordered. Have a great day. Thank you so much.